Just having a conversation.
Okay. Bethel CME Church was located down next to the railroad track. And they eventually moved it from the railroad track to where it's located across from Chapel Spring Church, which is on Monroe Street. And I don't know what else you want me to...
It was adjacent to the school.
School, yeah.
And there was some cafes up behind there and a black grocery store.
And I
in
can
Lawrenceville.
yeah. Jim Well run one cafe that was next to the church. Roosevelt Hicks ran one church, one place that was next to the church. And Billye Jones had a store that was also next to that church, in front of the school.
So was Beckville the only black church at the time?
Beckville was the only Methodist church in Beckville.
Okay, what other churches?
But then Chapel Spring was created. I had it down here in 1879 because there were two churches. There was a church called Moore Chapel and Maple Spring. And the Moore Chapel was up by where the high school is now. And Maple Springs was over closer to Youngblood community. And as it went to growing, those two churches, the membership was low, they joined together. Now, my granddaddy on my grandmother's side was at Moore Chapel. His name was Hine Pollard. I know, and some of the Moors, those are the only people that I remember being at that church. But then Maple Spring was over closer to Youngblood, and it had a few more members, so they joined together, and that's how C.C. Gladney, then Mr. Saul Black, that was some of the people, Mr. Tone Jones. Now, it was close to what it used to be called the McNeese Place. You heard the McNeese Place, Dory? The McNeese Place is down there close to where Sybil Collins used to live. But Beckville, a long time ago, town seat was down here by, what's the name of that? Bowley Hill. It was down there by Bowley Hill.
But it's
little past Beeson. You know where that dairy is, where you go take a left and go to Marble Grove?
Shibbol's Dairy.
It was in that area. That's where Beckville was, from what old folks told us years ago.
So what difference do you see in the churches back then versus today? What did y'all do differently then?
Well, it was even before my time when they organized. But from the churches when I grew up, there was nowhere else to go. So you had a lot better attendance than you do today. And it wasn't as many churches. There was only two. There was the Methodist Church, and there was Chapel Spring.
Which was a Baptist church.
Then later on, a lady called Mother Crane came through here, and she started the Holiness Church.
A woman started the Holiness Church?
She sure did. They called her Mother Crane.
Mother Crane.
She's an old lady. She started that church right across from where Paulette lives, behind those Jinxes. There was a house there, and she started a church. And when she started the church, I remember we used to go there a lot because it was nowhere else to go. We didn't have television. Nothing else to do. That was entertainment as well as going to church. I remember when Mr. Captain Woods hadn't joined there, but Miss Livonia and them belonged. It was a few of the Pittsons that belonged to that church that went there. And I'm trying to see who else that I can remember was at that church. Miss Emma Moore and them ended up at that church. And it grew from there. They built up. And you would not believe how small that church was and how important it seemed to be. It didn't even have enough room for one row of pews like we have now. They built it right in front of my mom and dad's house. And
they would have at the Methodist church when it was down next to the railroad track. they would have 11 o'clock service, and they would also have an evening service. And this is where the most of the people would go in the evening time. And what they would do when they had the 11 o'clock service, they would close all the stores or cafes. They would close down. And then they'd open back up, and then they'd close again when they had the night service. And that's the when we would go to church. Wasn't anywhere else to go, and so the young people would follow the girls to church.
So, okay, so y'all didn't have no honky tonks and no cafes?
They
that-
We
did.
had
We weren't
cafes,
allowed
but
to go there.
you wasn't allowed to go there. You know what I mean? At that time, you had to go to church.
And then, at that time, all the windows were up in the summertime. And it would be almost as many people standing on the outside as it was on the inside. And I remember the Methodist church being a lot more formal, you know, in how they conducted their services than we were. But they would have a big crowd because I can remember going there, and I wasn't tall enough, at that time I wasn't tall enough to see in the window, and they would have Easter programs. Miss Louetta Gates had an Easter, she was Louetta Jones, but she married Jimmy Gates. And she was gonna have an Easter program. And every child, don't care whose church you belong to, you're gonna be on that Easter program. Yeah, it was a big thing. Everybody would come out to the Easter program, hear the little kids say their Easter speech, you know, and they would always be at the Methodist church. And sometimes we'd have one at our church too, you know, at Chapel Spring. But Chapel Spring at that time was not here. Chapel Spring, from my first recollection, was over by Mr. John H. Hunt's house.
The preacher, the pastor.
Yeah.
Well, he wasn't a pastor at Chapel Spring.
know.
He was a deacon at that time. It was over, I don't know the name, I don't know the number of that road, but you know where that Poppy store is on 149? It's a road that goes down behind that store. And it would eventually lead you to where the church was.
So when did y'all move to this Chapel Springs?
This Chapel Spring was moved in 1950. Let's see.
58 or 59.
58.
58 or 59.
Okay.
That's when I met her.
Oh, and y'all courted.
I met her then, but I wasn't courting her then. I just met her here. My
Well,
sister was
Me and his sister was best friends.
coming down. We were best friends, and that's the first time I saw her.
Well, how did you court back then?
Walk and talk.
You walk and talk. You know what I mean? Get to talk to the girls until they got home, and walk them home.
Now,
Because there was very few people that had cars back then, wasn't it?
yeah, not only the school, not only was Bethel church down there, across from Bethel was the school. Okay, and the school didn't move until I was in the 3rd grade,
Yeah.
and they moved the school back here, behind this church on this hill, where Sunset, it was called Beckville
It was
Color
Beckville
School.
Color School back then. And
My
it,
mother went to school there.
And my classmate
father.
named the school. Her name was Billye Joyce McReed. She named the school here, Sunset.
At that time, it was like the Fair Play kids some of them had just begun to start coming when they got to be in high school. At that time, they had started coming, but it was an old big school, and they needed a new school and dragged it, you know, because I remember when it would get cold, we would all try to get close to the heater. They'd have to bring wood in. The young guys, boys would have to bring wood and keep the wood in the heater when it was cold.
They had a great big old barrel heater in the school back when it was down next to the railroad track.
My first teacher was
We would
Miss
always have to-
Inez Butler. She
And,
was my first teacher.
And she's from
She was
Carthage.
the sweetest
Yeah.
thing.
Right?
Miss Butler.
Her sons went to school at Beckville too.
AJ did.
Now, when I was in 1st grade, you heard Eugene Booter that just passed. That boy was so smart, it was unreal. But he was crazy. And I tell him, he knew it. And he's Dorothy Ingram's uncle. And it was me, him, Sassy, and a girl, we call her a wee baby named Athalie Ellison. She was very smart. We were the top 4 kids in the class. You know, and then it was one other girl. She was smart, but she was so stubborn. Anna Marie Fight, She
Well,
and
Francis was pretty smart.
And we went to school there. I'm trying to think. I can't remember what year, but I would have been in the 3rd grade when that school, 4th grade when they built the new Sunset School. That was the year my sister had polio. They built that school, and they moved up here to where, and that's how Beckville began to progress, an our section, because where we lived then, we had lights. We lived right in front of the Holiness Church over there on, what's the name? Jones Road. They call it Jones Road, but my dad always said it was Daniel Street. When they named the street, somehow they got the names off of the street. But we lived on Jones Road. Well, that way, we didn't have water, and we didn't have gas. So when they built that school, they had to run the water line, they had to run a gas line. So therefore, we were able to hook on and get gas. And at that time, the Holiness Church had gotten, it was over there. It was just that was the smallest little church, and it would be so many people. It'd be people hanging all in the windows. But we would be there on Wednesday night when they had joint meeting. Y'all remember joint meeting? They'd have joint meetings on Monday night, and that's when all the churches from around, the Holiness churches would come there, and it didn't matter to us. And my daddy had we were right across the street. They would get water from us. A lot of time they didn't have it, and he had cross ties on that stopped that road from eroding, his yard from eroding. People would be sitting
lined
on them. I mean, there'd be so many people out there.
And you
couldn't sleep. You might as well be out there.
And even at the Methodist church, it was always a bunch of people on the outside, standing on the outside.
Church, a bunch of people
and
on
sometime, I'll put this in, sometime they'd get into it out there, you know, arguing and everything during the church. And something happened, and I'm not going to tell what actually happened with the Jinxes. No, when well, I'll tell you. But Donnie Jenks was there on the outside with about 10 or 15 other men. And they got to arguing and everything, and he got into it with Pete Carter. The man was named Pete Carter. He was a kin to us. And Pete Carter was kind of, I don't know what you call it, but he had a high temper. And he got after Donnie, and Donnie ran in the church. And when he ran in the church, Pete Carter came in the church behind him. Reverend Beckville was preaching a song. And he ran in the church behind him, and he ran up there with a pulpit. And he ran up there and caught him and turned him around, and he kicked him in the behind.
Right in the church.
In the church.
Wow. You talking about folks running?
People were running everywhere, you know.
Losing their kids. They couldn't.
But it was amazing, you know.
You know, because people riding in wagons.
Yeah, it was
really
an experience.
Yeah.
Well, what happened with the sheriff? That story.
Okay, I wasn't born then.
They was born before. This was before our time. All we could go on is what our people told us about it.
So my mother didn't have any children. When my mom and daddy married, the church was over there when this happened, by the Hunts over there. But anyway, my mama said she was on her, they had got tired, they was having a singing. Well, they got tired and they started home. She and my mother-in-law, she stayed with my mother, her and my daddy stayed with my grandmother, my grandfather. She was going home with my grandfather and my grandmother. But my daddy stayed over there working in the stand. He was working in the stand, my Aunt Dollar was working in the stand, Mr. J.D. Whitaker. They had stands outside the church. They built stands and they sold food. And some men got to fighting. When they got to fighting, they couldn't make them quit, so they called the police. They called the sheriff. The sheriff come down and he got a little bit too rough with one of the guys, and they got killed. And it was people there. There's probably 1,000 people there. Them people ran, and you hear some of the stories about how people ran. And a lot of people said, about how people, the barriers had a car. They couldn't crank the car, so they picked it up and towed it. It was nothing. They towed it across the break. It was just my uncles. It was a lot of people that was not married. You know, when they would have a scene, it would just be so many people till it was just like you going to a ball game. You know how you go to like a football game or something, how people are gathered up? That's how it was. And I think everybody ran except my daddy, Mr. J.D. Whitaker, and Aunt Dolly. Aunt Dolly wasn't scared of nothing. She was like my grandmother. Nothing scared her. She lived to be 98 years old. Nothing I ever seen scared Aunt Dolly. And she wasn't bothering me. She said you couldn't get her to talk about it. She didn't want to talk about those stuff. But Daddy didn't talk about it. He killed it. Well, about black man killing a white man at that time.
It was dangerous.
It was.
So what actually happened was, after he killed him and everything, a lot of people ran off and everything.
All the people.
Masons were pretty strong then, the Masons.
Mr. Castleberry.
Yes. And they wanted to get him out of there. So I was told that they took and dressed him up like a woman. And put him in the wagon and rode right by the police. And they never did take who he was.
But my uncle said there was a lot of guys. He was from Long Branch. His name was Jesse. I never could get Jesse Wilson.
That was the
Jesse
high
Mathis was the high sheriff.
And the other guy was named Jesse Wilson.
And my uncle said some of his buddies were going to Long Branch, and he was from Long Branch. They looked around, he sat up on the wagon with them. They trying to get home, they were scared to death. But nobody ever know what really happened to him after that. And they also used to tell this story about the Castleberries, that they did kill a white man. You know, Castleberries had a high temper. He killed a white man, and they put him in a cardboard box and shipped him away from here to California. I heard that story so many times. Doris, you heard it too. So many times about how I shipped that man away from here and to keep the white folks from killing him. And they eventually said that Jesse Wilson claimed he hung himself in jail. And you know by then, no posse was not going to let him hang himself. No. They hung him.
They probably hung him.
Back that was, hey, time wasn't like they are now. Okay, it wasn't no NAACP or nothing like that. You black.
Yeah.
But I can remember this church when they first built it. It would be people looking all in the window, standing all around. When we have revival, you just have people, because you'd have television and nowhere else to go. Little cafes, you done seen them all the weekend. You'd run out, and that's where you met with the people.
Yeah.
And I remember the school down, the one I remember. Now they had a school in Beltank. I don't know, the people in Youngblood walked to this school, because I can remember my mama telling about how her and Pete Hunt and your mother-in-law, Martha Pitts, you know your mother-in-law and my mama's close friend, they would all be walking home from school. They didn't have a school bus. They had to walk no matter what the weather was. The white kids be on the school bus, they come by and start throwing rocks at them. So her and Pete Hunt revised the plan.
Okay, what did they do?
They got them some rocks and piled them up, and they knew about where they were going to pass them in. When they started throwing rocks, they started throwing back.
And breaking the windows.
He stopped the bus, but he breaking it. They couldn't find out who did it. They knew somebody did it, but they didn't know who. But that broke that up, you know.
But my mother went to school in Beltank.
Where is Beltank?
It's down the hill. We call it the His Quarter, right off of 124 right now.
Okay.
And she went to school there. Also, the principal from Carthage went there. Ozzie Sanders went there. She went to school with Ozzie Sanders when he was going to school. I think they only went to something like the 8th, 6th, or 7th grade. They didn't go all the way to the 12th grade. But that's where she went to school. And she named a bunch of people that was in her class, Roosevelt Hicks and John Boy Hicks. And she named one of the booby girls was in her class.
Miss Maud Hicks and them.
Yeah.
They were some
They
of
were
them.
all in some of them in
Maud,
her
but
class.
she wasn't the Hicks then. They were Williams. Bob Williams, them, because she used to talk about how scared she was of daddy. Yeah.
But they all started going to school at Beckville, and they had to walk 5 miles to school every day. We walked 2.5 miles, and they walked 5 miles.
What time did school start?
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock. You better not be late.
You better not be late either. And we walked to school in rain, snow. You better not be late.
But
And you get to school in the wintertime, it would be so
cold.
cold and everything like that, and they had a big old barrel. He was sitting in the middle of the floor.
What happened if you were late?
You got a spanking.
Yeah, they spank you.
Yeah.
They'd give you licks back then.
You did.
But we had
Billye Adams
teachers.
Tatum used to teach down there. She did. She taught second grade. Miss Matkin. What was Miss Matkin's name?
They taught it Beckville, not.
They taught it Beckville.
They taught it back.
Beckville.
Sure did.
Miss Matkin.
Miss Tatum. Miss Tatum was a mean woman. She was a
Miss
very
Butler,
mean
Miss
woman.
Tatum.
Huh? Say what?
Where was the school when it happened?
It was down under the hill.
By the railroad track.
And during that time, Professor Scott had taught there. And then after he, as the principal, and then when he left, Professor Mayfield, I'm saying, started teaching there. He was a real big old guy with slack breeches, I can remember. But anyway, he's the one that caused them to build a school up here at Sunset School. They had a black school board then. And some of the black people men had, they had some voice, you know what I mean, by being, having that black school. And, but they killed that boy. They told him he better leave out of town. And so you finish this year and don't you come back next year. And that's how he ended up. He bought two lots down there next to my brother, Dave Wayne now. And he left here. I don't know whatever become of it. But he told them that the government had appropriated the money to build that school up here and that it needed to be done. And that's when he had to leave back.
Wow.
Sure did. But anyway, when he left there, Tom Butler came in. That was Miss Butler's husband. And then from there, who was?
Mr. Allen.
Mr. Allen, yeah.
Lord Allen.
Mm-hmm.
How many students are we talking about in a classroom?
Back then, we were talking about 30 to 40 students in the classroom. It didn't have no limit to how many
Sometimes
kids
it
would
had
be
two
in the
classes in
classroom.
one.
It had
I
two
know
classes
we've had
in
this
one room.
many. When I
They-
graduated, it was 17 of us, black kids.
Were y'all all like on the same level, like
Everybody was
first,
on
second,
the same
third,
level.
fourth?
No, we had, like, you still had a first grade, second grade, you know.
Yeah.
In a separate room?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
Most
okay.
of the time.
So
But
it wasn't like,
sometimes they'd have two classes. If it was a big enough class, they'd have two classes in one room, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
okay. Okay, that's
And you
it.
could sit up and look on the outside. That was no problem. You could see on the outside because there's cracks in the building. It was hard.
We used to have spelling race. You remember
Yeah,
that?
mhm.
Spelling contest. And if you moved to the front of the line, if you won the last time, the one that won, they started off at the first, and it went down the line who could not spell or did not spell. And every time you spell the word that, I never will forget that. You could pass up somebody. That was so much fun to get to pass up somebody because you spell the word. Yeah.
What, did y'all play any type of sports?
They had
They
basketball.
had basketball, but we didn't have a gymnasium.
Okay, my mother
When they was down there
she
on the
was
hill.
one of the first, one of the basketball teams at the Beckville school down there. It was her, Charles Hicks, Thelma Roberts, right? What was Mr. B. Rex's daughter? She was on it. Mama said she was the go pitcher. I'll never forget her telling me she was the go pitcher. Gold, you know, she said gold pitcher is what it was. But they had one of the first basketball teams ever that was created there. And then they had a baseball team. You know, we didn't have a girls softball.
They didn't have a
team.
football team, anything like that.
Never had a
Never
band.
have, yeah.
Never had in Beckville.
How many black schools in the Beckville area at one time?
At one time,
Tabernacle?
at one time.
You had Tabernacle,
Yeah.
you had Bell Tank down there where they had this school. And then we had Beckville School. That's how many black schools here. But all the schools didn't go to 12 grades. Some of them only went to like the 7th or 8th grade. And then they'd have to go to school somewhere else.
But in Beckville,
If they
okay,
wanted to
the
further
people-
their education. And a lot of the teachers didn't have, they didn't finish no 12th grade, did they?
a lot, and
Miss Smith-
the people
Miss
from
Smith was one of
Watergrove, a lot of people from Watergrove came to school. On 124 down there, as far as Cutting Wallace's house, they came to Beckville School. They didn't go to college.
Vera Thompson and the
then-
Thompsons.
Yeah.
Youngblood?
Youngblood always came.
Youngblood came, they walked
They
from
walked
Youngblood and walked down to the school.
What about Fairplay?
Fairplay,
Started at 7th grade,
when
8th grade.
when they started, I believe they had a bus.
Yeah,
That's when they started the bus and started busing the kids to our school.
yeah. Yeah, at 8th grade. Because I can barely remember Florette being one time
Yeah.
when they was down there. She never went to school up here as far as I know.
No.
I know Jessie Mae Wallace Brown went up here. And some of them Luckies from Fairplay, they went down.
The Popes,
And the Popes, they went to school, they lived well.
and Bob Wheaton and them kids.
That when they went to school.
But they wouldn't go to school a year round. They would let them out of school at least 1 month in the year. Most of the kids did, and they would go out West Texas and pick cotton every year.
Yeah, I can remember.
They wouldn't
when
penalize them.
There would only be 3 of me, Dooley Barra, and trying to think of who else would be and Helen Hicks. We didn't have to pick cotton. Then them Browns and some of the Hunts. But the other kids, cotton picking time, there wasn't nobody in school, so they had to catch up. They had to come and catch. They had to catch up when they got back. Teacher had to give them makeup stuff and help them to catch up because they had to go pick cotton and work so they have money for school
Sure
clothes.
would.
But I was fortunate enough that I didn't have to do that. Mac Williams didn't go. They lived here. They didn't go. You know.
Okay, so before we go to Carthage, tell me about the healing trees or all these stories I'm hearing about the lady who could touch you and you'll be healed. Tell me a little bit about that. And I think you said y'all had a healing
We
tree.
had one in our, but a well. And the tree may still be there now, I'm not sure, but it was a toothache tree. Whenever somebody had the toothache, they'd go up there and they would cut a limb off, a branch off of it. And they would take that branch and peel the bark off of it. And then you chew it up just like, you know what I mean, with that and rub on your teeth and everything. It will stop the toothache.
For real, or is this just hearsay,
For real.
like
No, this
tales?
is real. This is real. Sure would.
You tried it.
We had to do that's the only thing we had back then. You couldn't go to no doctor.
It wasn't no
Wasn't no
dentist.
dentist. Wasn't Beckville. You didn't have no dentist in Beckville.
What you think they make medicine out of?
Yeah, that's what they make medicine out of.
I know.
You don't want to do stuff like that.
My grandma believed in something called tread sand.
Mm-hmm.
It's that little yellow flower you see growing around here, and eventually it'll have something like little tubes on it after it dries out, and they take that and make medicine. And they make that.
And one of my brothers, I don't know how he did
Put
it
around
to
the
the day, but he could stop the toothache. He could stop it.
You sure could. I know your back would be sore because Mama had it so bad. She couldn't get to a dentist, and they kept telling her, VT was dating me then. And you know, my brother could stop it. He could stop that on Mama. But her mouth, she said her mouth was real sore after that, but he stopped it.
They could do some things. It was
Because see, you didn't go to
unbelievable.
concert till Saturday. I don't care what went on. You didn't go to concert
And you
till
couldn't
Saturday.
walk on the street when you got out there. You had to, on the sidewalk, you had to walk off of the sidewalk. You couldn't do
Amen.
My brother bought a hat, and it had a feather in it.
Yeah.
And Carver Aiken pulled that feather out of there and told him he's a bird, get in the woods. He pulled that feather out of his head. Back then, they put a little feather in a cap. Huh? Carver Aiken was the high sheriff in Beckville.
Was it Beckville or just
Panola County. It
Panola
was in
County.
Panola County.
Because Mr. Robert Brakes was the sheriff in Beckville because he didn't have one arm. You
He didn't
remember?
have, yeah.
I remember him. He had one arm. He was the
Well,
sheriff.
he was the constable here, and what he would do, Robert Brakes, was he had that one arm, he was very poor. In fact, there's a bunch of poor white folks in Beckville during this time. And what he would do is, he knew they gambled down the railroad track. And he would go down that railroad track, and they would give him a little money, and he wouldn't arrest anybody. He said, if I carry down in there, and if I arrest you and carry the Carthage, they gonna take the money from you, and I ain't gonna get a penny. He said, I need some food and flour and stuff. give me enough money to buy my flowers now and keep a gambling.
And he
And that's
lived
what they
right
do.
behind us. He lived right there by Paulette and Bobby. He'd be your neighbor if he's still living. That Brakes man that lived right there in the yellow house, that's where they lived.
Sure did.
I remember his wife. When she died, she like chicken grease on her face. She just all that, ooh. But she was a nice lady.
Mhm.
She treated you nice, but she just, well, it's facts, it's true. She treated you nice. But all of them, my dad lived on that hill, it would be a lot of poor. White folks would come to Daddy for help.
Yeah, they were.
Daddy would help people.
So what did your dad do?
My dad worked, when I was old enough though, he worked on the railroad. He worked on the railroad.
He used to drive the white folks.
Yeah, he used to work for Mr. Meadows and them. They owned the store and Daddy drove for Mr. Meadows and did everything for Mr. Meadows.
And my daddy was farm. He was farm, but he'd also work on the railroad some. But every year we'd raise something like 15 or 20 bales of cotton.
And how much was that worth?
A bale of cotton was worth roughly 14 pounds. 1,400 pounds of cotton would bring you $250. Is what it bring you back then.
And that'll last you the whole year?
No,
or-
well, if you said we had 12 or 14 bales though. You know
Oh,
what I mean?
okay.
So we wouldn't just depend on the cotton and stuff like that and everything, but we had cows, hogs, we had all kind of fruit trees. We had a place where you could go fishing, a pond. We had everything on there. We had.
Mississippi planted too many roads.
If you planted too many, well, that was back in about 48 or 49, when they came out and you could only plant so many acres of cotton due to how many acres of land you had. And Daddy, I remember one year he had 2 rows of cotton, too much, more than he was supposed to, and they made him ply it up, the government did.
Stood there and watched.
They stood there and watched until he plied it up.
The cotton gin was right where, you know where that, them apartments are in Beckville, those housing, the housing thing, that's where the cotton gin was, right there across from the church. I remember that.
Well, they had 2 cotton gins.
I
You
remember
remember the other cotton gin. I just barely remember one. It was one right down past our Adams house there. You know where, what's his name live at?
Weaver?
Where we live, it was a cotton gin, right
I
there.
should remember that, because that's right close.
Because back in 48 or 48, I believe around 48, a mad dog came through and he bit all the mad dogs uptown here and down in Jordan Quarter. And that mad dog went down to a place called a mill pond. It's where we fished all the time. It was a big old area of water. And mad dogs won't cross water. If they go to it, they won't cross it. So he turned around from there and came all the way back up to Beckville. And they killed him right there where the gin was. That's where they caught up with him and killed him. But
It was a brown and white dog.
Sure
I
was.
remember seeing that mad dog, because Daddy carried us down there. There was nothing else, that was excitement.
But it was amazing, you know, what went on back then. That a lot of things happened.
And down that railroad track, it didn't stop there. It was people lived all the way almost to the Shreveport crossing.
Sure was.
What's the Shreveport crossing?
I don't know why they call it Shreveport crossing, but it was. Anybody know why they call it Shreveport crossing? I think that was a route then that they went, you know,
Oh, okay.
that they used at that time, and we call it Shreveport crossing.
I think that's why they water up down there, you know what I mean, collect water for the train.
Is that why that pond is that don't have a bottom?
That's where it's at.
Okay, it's a lake down there.
And they said
On the
box
railroad
frogs off
track.
in there. They fell off in there, they couldn't get them out back then.
It says don't have no bottom. It's always been what's been said, you know. It's not a bottom to it.
It's about 3 miles there out of Carthage if you get on the railroad.
I
track.
walked there.
From Beckville?
Yes.
Billy and I
yeah.
walked to Carthage.
I
Right
walked
in
across
there.
one time.
And that's what, 8 miles?
No,
9, really.
it's really about 9 miles. But we walked from there to Carthage.
Why were y'all walking?
Just cause we kind of wanted to.
Yeah, we just talking and walking. And we just
We fished down at that big hole and then walked on into Carthage.
How long did it take
Car
you?
ride.
I don't remember how long
We was down there, we left about, took us about a half a day, 'cause, well, we was fishing and going on, you know. But
Well, we
people
walked
used
that
to,
railroad
my
track
grandmother
up.
used to walk the Highland Quarter every first Saturday in August. She'd get out and walk by herself.
What do you got, Faith?
First Saturday in August. He must have said something he didn't need to say. Yeah.
Okay, what about, I think it's J.R. Mitchell or Pearl Booty talking fire out of people?
Yeah, it was Miss Pearl's mother that could do that.
Her mother?
Uh-huh. If somebody got burned bad, they would take her to that, Miss Thelma Robertson's mother. She could talk, I don't know, I never got burned, but they would take her to that, and she would talk the fire out of
What
her.
would she do?
I don't know. I never got burned. Have you ever heard it, Doris? She talked to fire to people. Yeah. They, I know that one time this family got burned, and one of the guys got burned up, and they said he was too far gone for it.
They did for Leon Hicks.
They was
They
too
were
far
gonna
gone.
talk to fire to
If
him.
you
but
got
he-
burned or something,
He got
they
going
would
real
take you
bad.
to- And Mr. Junior Mitchell moved voice off of me.
Mhm.
Now, he do something to your hand, I know that. I saw him do something to my grandmother's hand, and next thing you know, she had on warts. They have warts, people had warts, you know, he moved warts.
He moved off my grandmother.
Y'all saw it?
Yeah,
My
my grandmother, I know it did for my grandmother, because I saw it happen. She had a wart on her face, long as that, and he talked to her, we were in Pine Hill that day, and they ran up on him, and she said, I got this wart, I need to get off Junior. And whatever he did, I was watching, I saw him do something to her fingers and all. And next thing, that wart was gone, you know, without you even realizing it was gone.
Well, we had something happen to school. The young man was named Johnny Ray Jenks, and they accused him of stealing some money at Sunset High School. And Mr. Allen whipped him, gave him some licks, I'll never forget it, and tried to make him say, but he admitted, I did not steal the money. So they decided we need to do something. They went to the Jenkses and they went to Shreveport and came back, and they told them they'd find out who actually stole the money. When they came back, they came to the school, and they told him that boy didn't steal that money. Said that little girl right there stole the money. And they questioned her, and she actually stole it. So they went to some fortune tellers in Shreveport. That's where they used to go.
They call it two-headed.
They call it two-headed people.
They call them what?
Two-headed people. And she actually stole that money. She's the one got it.
And they had beat that boy and put him
And
in
they
the
had
sweat
whooped
box.
that boy, and we know that for a fact. Mhm.
Bad.
They told him who did it.
Wow.
But people had to do whatever.
They did whatever was necessary for them to do, you know, what I mean, to
Just about.
find out
to
something.
survive, yeah.
Okay, well, let's go back down where y'all were walking all the way to Carthage. Did y'all have permission to walk?
We walked the railroad
We were
track.
married and we just got on.
Oh, you were married then,
we were
okay.
married, yeah.
Okay, so tell us about Color Town. Color Town.
In Carthage.
In Carthage?
Well,
Yes.
every town had one. Beckville was right down there by the.
They had one
church.
here in Beckville as
Well, it
well?
wasn't, it was just a hangout.
Mhm.
But Colored Town in Carthage was right there, where Live Oak and, I don't know what's the name of the street.
Right, west of October.
Yeah, right there
Where
down from West Monotone, right.
West Alto's on the corner. And on down, it was like 4 or 5 stores. Then Mr. Black owned one, a store. And then.
Y'all had a barber shop?
When Aubrey Allen.
Old man Allen run that cafe down there. You'd go down there, it'd be so many people there on the
See,
Saturdays.
Between Live Oak and the stores, it was just a place where people would park their mules. If they had a car, they'd park the car, their wagons and stuff. And people hang out there. And they'd be hanging out
Come
up
up
down
on
that
the
street.
On the Saturday, there'd be so many people there.
People go up there and do their shopping and come back down there. 'Cause the reason I know it is, I would go visit my aunt on Live Oak, and she would send me to the store. You know, we would hear all those people out there keeping up noise.
And I ain't gonna call them names, but there was some people, some women, I guarantee you, every Saturday they were there. And I won't say nothing else, but they were there.
Doing
For
what?
a reason. And that was every Saturday.
And you see, they didn't have no bathrooms uptown for black people to go to.
So did.
And so you had, if you went to the bathroom, you had to go, had a little place back out there where
Sure
you could
did.
go. And
But
have
how,
parade.
there was a wall like back there,
You
wasn't
couldn't
it?
go up on the street, you had to stand back there,
You see.
and they come switching by you.
It was something, yeah.
And we wasn't allowed to walk up on the,
You
on
sure
the
wasn't?
square to watch the parade.
If you wanted
The
anything, you go up
Christmas
there and
parade.
get it, and you run back and come from up there.
Yeah.
You could get your hair cut, you could get something to eat,
Yeah.
and they had a little.
They had a barber shop there.
Good hamburger.
The Williamses run that barber shop there for a number
Yeah.
of years.
They had some good hamburgers.
So what happened to Colored Town? Did it
A lot of
just,
the people died out.
Yeah, it
Just
just finally
died
went out
out.
of
And it
existence.
just
because
kinda went out of
evolution.
existence, yeah.
You know, you got where now you can go. You didn't have McDonald's then. You got a McDonald's now. You go eat something. And then Carthage eventually had a Dairy Queen. You could go to the back of the Dairy Queen. It had a window back there. The Dairy Queen. It was on Tennehaw Highway. You go to the back and you order your food from that window in the back. Now, even though it was black women in there cooking,
Yeah.
you could go up front of that Dairy Queen and order your
Coffee
food.
shop.
You better not go up in
You
the
had to
front.
go to the side and order your food from that Dairy Queen. That was one of the first, I guess, fast food places that come through here.
And Joe's Cafe, where we go now, you know what I mean, you got available to you, or you got access to it, you better not go to Joe's Cafe.
Right.
Little room by
yeah.
And your mother-in-law worked at that
Yes,
coffee shop. You
yes.
had to go to the back of that
Sure
coffee
did.
shop
And order through the
through the
window.
You
window.
sure did.
And they had a little place back there, back of the dollar store, you could park your car,
Mhm.
where you wouldn't have to walk so far. And there, because you were, and when they went to the movies, now I remember going to the movies in Beckville. Beckville used to have a movie theater.
really?
They had a movie theater, and then there was Mr. Watkins,
They had a, yeah,
and then
Hardware
they had a
store.
lot of stores in Beckville.
had a bank,
All
they had a
that.
bank and, yeah,
Post
they had
office,
Post office,
furniture store.
Yeah.
In Beckville.
And
drugstore.
you
Man,
also-
Joplin ran the drugstore.
Okay, but you also said something about the Danky, the train?
Yeah, that was the train that came through.
Was that during that time as well?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And then they had a bus. You could ride the bus. They had a man. On this street right here, that was a main street. That Highway 149 wasn't over there. I
It didn't,
remember
it sure
when,
didn't.
when they built that. But the main street was coming right
Right down
through
through
here.
Beckville.
And Miss Effie Boatman lived down here right on the corner of Jones and Monroe,
Mhm.
right up here. And a lot of people stop at her house to catch, they call him housefly. And housefly, that was the bus driver.
Mhm.
Housefly, you catch housefly, you go to Jacksonville, go wherever you want to go on housefly. Or you go to Carthage and catch him and come back.
Come
you
back.
know. Well, they call him horsefly, because me and my brother would just sit on the porch and see who's going to come through on the bus, you know, Miss Effie's boat.
And like this, they called it the Danky. And what would happen
The
was,
Danky was the train.
that's what I said, the train. But Billy and them could actually ride the train free. It didn't cost them anything because their daddy worked for the railroad.
But we didn't go because
But
Mama
they
didn't
very
trust
seldom
us
ever
out
rode it.
nowhere by ourselves. Yeah. But I did ride it with my grandmother one time, once or twice,
Yeah.
going to Carthage.
Okay, and this may be just Hollins Quarters, I don't know if it happened here, but they were saying that when people passed away, the neighborhood would get together, there was a man who would make a coffin, and then the next day they would bury the deceased or something like that. Can you enlighten us on what happened, you know, with the black folks back then?
It even happened here in Beckville. Our cousin in this fight, his wife had twins. And my daddy and some more men in the neighborhood, they built a casket. They were building caskets. But Bill Hicks, down in Jordan Quarter, they built his casket. And they put him in that casket and put him in the back of the wagon and carried him to the graveyard. Daddy said, and they buried. But that, I don't know how many caskets my father
I used to hear my mother
help
say-
make for people.
My mother
They
said,
would
I
make
line
those
them in your
caskets.
coffins.
And the
That's
women
all.
would line them. They would line them with a material, I don't know what, and they'd have cotton, they put it in there for the padding, and then they take some cloth and they'd redo them caskets, do them in the inside. They look nice.
But I never knew where the cooling board was. I guess they ladies stayed at home, because I know when my grandmother died, Mr. Black, Cuz Willard had her body, Willard Thompson. And we cleaned out everything out of the front room, and she laid and stayed in that front room in her casket. But I've often heard my mama say, I lined a mini casket.
Mm-hmm.
In her
They would
time.
line them.
They would get
They
together
sure
and
would.
work, and the men would build the caskets, and the women would line them, and they would bury them.
And they were doing that in all the neighborhoods, the black neighborhoods. They'd build
Right,
those
too.
men would get together and the women would line them, what I mean, on the inside.
Yeah.
So would it take like 2-3 days, or how long did y'all wait to bury someone?
Back then, they didn't even bomb people. I remember when they didn't even bomb people. So they would set up with them like in the houses. They'd set up like a night with them. And then they'd take them the next day and bury them. Miss Lissy, Booty, that's what they did. Because I remember that just real well. They brought her home, and the people went there and set up with her.
Well, yeah,
Mhm.
they said
all
on my
night. They sat
grandmother
there
all
all
night.
night, and then that next day they buried her.
So basically, they had a graveside service or whatever, not
No,
like
they
they
took
do
them.
now.
They
They
take
took
them to the church. They
church?
take them to the church.
Yeah.
But after about
took my
2 or 3
grandmother
days,
to
you
church.
can't, you couldn't be able to stand the smell in the church if you took them, and kept them out that long. They'd bury them. They'd go ahead and bury them. They hadn't always embalmed people.
Okay. Is there anything else y'all want to talk about? We have a few more minutes.
I don't know, but
Well, if you got a question, that's a good man.
Talk about courtship between you and Billy.
Yeah, because they kind of skipped over that. You notice that?
who being him?
Well,
We keep telling what you had to go through.
But we used to have.
I would go up to Billy and them's house and everything, but I always would kid her after we was married that I was the boss. I mean, like I said at the front of the table, but I didn't. But anyway, I would go up there and everything. You could only stay so long and you had to go home.
Yeah.
Because Mr. Bill was
Daddy
it's
be
time for
on
you to come in. You know what I
Bedtime,
mean?
you go home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Hey, my daddy liked him.
Yeah.
He always respected him. And Ruby Ann, there was 2 people, his sister Ruby. Daddy thought so much of them.
And you didn't just back then. You didn't just go and marry somebody that you didn't really know nothing about. A lot of times your parents, like my parents, they thought Mr. Bill was some of the nicest people you'd be around. Mr. Bill and them felt the same way about my daddy. So they were good friends and everything. And so
About Paulette.
yeah. And Paulette and them was tough. They'd have me running sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes Paulette and Gino, they'd put me to stepping.
But they were the baby
I
sisters,
know.
right?
Yeah, but they were little girls,
They were, Paulette was terrible. She threw rocks at
They
them.
throw out rocks
She
to
hit
it.
on the switch and run them. She'd run them. They'd try her best to run them off.
Yeah.
Paulette was tough.
Yeah, they were kids.
We had a piano, and if she got tired of playing that piano, when Paulette got through it, we had to leave.
You see,
'Cause
they-
we never could play our own piano. There was always somebody in there playing the piano. If she get tired of it, they gonna have to go home.
Y'all lived in a little house right here behind.
I used to, when we first married.
When we
lived
first
right
married, we
there.
moved in a house right here by the church. And we rented that house, and we lived there until 1968, wasn't it?
When you 71?
Then you just
Well, we had our
lived
house
half
built
of-
in 1960. We
Huh?
bought
Yeah.
that place where
Did
we
y'all
are now.
have half of the house or the whole house?
Well, we had access to the whole house, but we fixed the room up. I completely redid the house after we moved there. Just about. We didn't have a bathroom in there. We had an outside, toilet, and I put a bathroom in there. I
Well,
put a sink in there in the kitchen. I did a lot of work on it.
That little junk house behind y'all.
Yeah.
Mr. Hub.
Yeah. And then we had a little junk house right behind us there.
What is a junk house?
Well, it was a
Like
house
a little
over
shed.
like a little shed back there.
But a crazy man lived back there.
Uncle Tom came down and asked us, could he live there? And we said yes. And he moved out there in that little house.
Is he the one that killed that woman?
Who?
That mama held the baby?
No.
No,
Oh,
no. It was, they were related to him. It was his daughter,
you may want to tell about that.
yeah. Then, it was Jack Reese, was that his name, that killed, yeah, he was from Long Branch somewhere. And
It
he
wasn't
married-
Jack Reese, it was
He
Jack.
married one of them Hawkinses, and they didn't get along. And she broke up with him, and
She quit him and he went down and killed her baby too.
he went there and shot the baby, and when he shot her, he shot through the baby and through her breast and shot her. And Daddy had been over to, Daddy had cows, because he bought Old Chapel Spring, and he had gone to feed his cows. He met the guy going back toward Long Branch, walking, when other people walked in, everybody walked. And so Daddy got there and he heard all this hollering and stuff, and he stopped, and then he went and got Mama and her neighbor, Nora. And Mama said the police had got there by the time she did, and when they did get in, they handled the baby, and she said the baby was just laying there, and when it would just whimper, his brains would just ooze out his head. But it killed the mother, and the mother-in-law, it shot her. She never did do no good after that. And then the old man just went crazy, because it was so horrible what happened to them.
He wasn't there when it happened.
So it was really horrible.
Something just got bad now.
But she broke up with him and he couldn't take it.
It was back then too.
But we wasn't that for us to walk to Holland, go to Holland Quarter.
We walked back,
Daddy
we
finally
walked
got a
across
car.
the creek. Tabernacle at the church, so y'all know where Tabernacle and Shiloh is. We walk over to Shiloh, we boys would.
Baseball, big baseball.
Yeah, they used to have baseball games here on Saturday. Beckville was alive.
There used to be a
On
lot of
Saturday
people at the
night,
baseball game too. People
and
would
they had a
come from that
cafe right, they had another cafe right there on the corner down here. What's the name of that street? That goes down toward y'all house, man. Jones, they still Jones, on the corner of Jones and Monroe's. There was a cafe there. Then there was some more cafes on down there, and they began to close. And ooh, they would have good hamburgers, and boy, on Saturday they'd play that music. Ooh, yeah. And then eventually a man put a cafe right here next door to the church.
And you know, when they had the school there and everything, a lot of time, I don't remember a whole lot about it, but you had to carry your lunch to school. They didn't have a cafeteria or anything. And then the kids that didn't carry their lunch, most of them would go up at the store. They had a sweet cake called a bow track. You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
They called it a bow track. It was about a foot long. And it
What,
cost
a foot?
behind. It was pretty long, yeah. Just about, wasn't quite a foot, maybe 8 inches long. But anyway, most of the kids would go up there and buy a drink for 6 cents, and then buy them a bow track for a nickel. And that's what they ate for lunch.
Sometimes you can bring your lunch. But our school had no playground equipment
Nothing.
whatsoever. The teachers buy a ball and a bat, for them to play baseball with, and then they have basketball. But we had no playground equipment. We played with each other. And I remember right down that hill behind where Mac and them lived, they lived where the school used to be. We had a big old round hole, and we girls would meet up in there and sit there and talk and have our lunch. That was our little meeting place. That hole is probably still out of that big tree. And we would sit there
And I got a bootlegging here in Beckville, and everybody was wondering why on a Saturday he was going down there to school, being around that school. The school was sitting up off the ground like that. You could call up under the
I
school.
could walk under there, but
Just
7,
right.
8 years old.
And we were playing out there one day, and guy went up under that school, and there was all of his whiskey and stuff was up under that school. And the teachers collected it. The amazing thing was they didn't never tell us what they did, but I'm sure they carried it on home. But no, they never told us anything. But they collected all that whiskey and homebrew and stuff that he had up under that school. And they always say the guy that did it was E.T. Jenks. The Well, he's
Yeah.
dead if he can't come back and tell us nothing. I said nothing to him.
When we started school up here, they started having, did they have chapel down there every morning? I don't remember them having chapel, and we couldn't go. They would
Yeah,
have
they had
assembly.
kids,
They would
yes.
have assembly. You had to be there. And then assembly in the morning, and the principal would tell you what he expected out of you, what was going on, and he would have, you know, he let you know right then that you wasn't in charge, he was. And chapel, I don't know if y'all remember chapel, and if it was anything, good things going on, you would get to hear about them too, you know. But most of us learned how to speak, talking about Miss Louisa's Easter program. You go sell Easter speech if you was in Beckville, because Miss Louisa was gonna give you one. Yeah. If it wasn't up, but what you looking at me so hard for, I didn't come to stay. I just come to tell you Happy Easter Day. My brother's birthday. Yeah, but
Well, this will be the last section. What about your neighbors? Did y'all look out for each other?
yes.
You knew your neighbors?
When we lived out in the country, and this is not a brag, not bragging, but we fed a lot of people because we farmed and we raised some of everything. And Daddy always made to other neighbors welcome to whatever he had and everything. And for that reason, I mean, people always looked up to us, you know what I mean, for helping people out. And he wouldn't sell it to them; he would give it to them.
Well, see, people didn't have deep freezers. They didn't have freezers then. They barely had a refrigerator. When we would kill hogs, you get ready. You take all that you done cured to somebody.
Some
and
neighbor.
then my daddy was fortunate enough to work on the railroad track. And it was a certain ring when the train would derail, them old men knew it. When the train would run over a cow, them old men knew it. Okay? They knew it. They would go and get them cows. That's the best meat you ever ate. When the train would kill a cow, they would go, and it would be my daddy, Cousin Buddy, Uncle Henry Lou, Mr. Johnny, Mr. Roosevelt, Mr. W.L. They would go and get that cow and come back and kill that cow. They kill on my porch a lot of time. I was there to get up next morning and scrub it out, and they would divide up that meat.
But when they let them know it happened, they know it happened.
They had a ring.
They had a whistle that they would sound, and they knew what that whistle meant. When they ran over a cow, something like that, and they didn't know to go to it. But they sounded, and they knew what it meant. And if it was just a wreck or something like that, they had a sound that they would make, a whistle that they would blow, and the people that worked on that railroad, they knew what that
People
meant.
didn't sell folk stuff. They gave it away. My mama had a peach orchard, and she gave people peaches. She had a peach orchard. Me and Dub be busy with buckets, taking this one some peaches, taking that some peaches. And the preachers always stayed at our house. Other folks had houses, I don't know why they didn't stay there. They always, as many of us that was, the preacher always stayed at our house.
We always had a bunch of people there.
Okay, well, I'm going to get personal. We got about 5 more minutes or 3 more minutes, really.
Okay.
So was it 3 brothers married 3 sisters? How did that happen?
Well, we were married 11 years before the rest of them. We were, they would all come to my house to help us with our children and be at our, just gang around us. And eventually, did y'all get married before Ann and Dave? No, Ann and Dave Wayne got married. They couldn't stand each other. They hated each other. But they kept coming around, you know. They would come to our house. I lived right back there. They'd be sitting on my porch, and they just kind of got around. And next thing, all of a sudden one day, 3 of us done married them folks. We didn't realize that until later on that 3 of us done got married, because Faye was at East Texas, and Jeff would go up there and pick her up. See about her, he'd go get her. We sometimes we'd go get her, and he'd take her back, you know, to East Texas. And Ann and Dave Wayne, they was both so stubborn. They were right out here. And Ann was driving a red car. She wouldn't get back, and Dave Wayne wouldn't get back. So they had ran into
They ran into each other in that car.
And while
Wait
they
a minute, I don't remember.
they try to sell the wreck. While they try to sell the wreck, they start dating. Yeah, they were some contrary people.
Yeah.
Them too, and they ended up getting married.
Okay, I think we can end on that good note.
Okay.